With all of the turmoil in the financial markets, we need some sense of stability. So today we will discuss what is a reserve currency, and I'll use easy explanations with diagrams. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. I want to break this down today and get into exactly why it's important and why it's going to change. Let's look at this right here from my book in my chapter on reserve currencies. I knew that it was so important, so I included an entire chapter on it. So the quote from Hayek said, "Practically all governments of history have used their exclusive power to issue money to defraud and plunder the people. We have seen this specifically with the Federal Reserve. Since 1913, the value of the dollar has declined dramatically, and of course, this puts a huge burden upon the public as real goods become more expensive." The highlighted portion near the bottom says a reserve currency is the international unit for pricing of products such as gold, oil, and corn. Very important to know that these reserve currencies, and there have been a few throughout history, are the international pricing. So even though it may have nothing to do with the US at all, they are still using the US dollar in order to do this transaction. So let's get into that right now. I'll tell you exactly why the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world currently. First, we're going to show you this. It's a diagram from my book. China, and this is just an example, wants oil from Russia. They have to exchange their currency for US dollars, and then they give those US dollars to Russia. Then they receive their oil. So even though, as I said, it has nothing to do with the US dollar, they're still exchanging the yuan for that US dollar in order to give it to Russia. Why is this the case? Well, the reason a reserve currency is used is because it is seen as being stable. When you're doing international trade, you want this sense of stability because you need to predict 3 months, 6 months, a year, and further on into the future that you will have these stabilities. Because of course, these agreements that these countries sign are not for the next day. They may be for years down the road. So we need to ensure stability. So that's exactly why a reserve currency is chosen in the first place. And this is the burden, though, that it puts on any particular nation. I'll get into more of that shortly, but I just wanted to show you another way of showing you this diagram. And it's a similar situation here, but even more simple. And you can see the flags being used to represent the countries. Russia does an exchange with China. So they are interacting between each other, and off to the west over here, we have the US. Now, they're not part of this exchange at all, really. They're not dealing with the oil, and essentially, they're not the one transacting between these two. But if you look at this one, they are benefiting, and essentially it is free money in a way, and they're simply just sitting on this big pile of cash, all because of their reserve currency status. The petrodollar, for example, is something that makes them incredibly successful at what they're doing. Another thing is that when you have a reserve currency, you're able to essentially ship away your debt. People can accumulate your dollars and allow you to continue to print money because someone else is going to buy it up. And that's what's been happening for these past decades, allowing the US to increase its real supremacy over the entire world. Now, that's it for the diagrams. I want to get into the deeper intel, and essentially this. The old global financial order is, well, old. This is out of the Time magazine, established in 1944 and named after the New Hampshire town where the agreements were drawn up. The Bretton Woods system created an international basis for exchanging one currency for another. And in fact, this is the exact same time when they started the IMF and the World Bank. A whole different topic for another day. But essentially, 1944 is when this currency system began, and they called it the Bretton Woods Agreement. That's all you need to know for that. In an effort to free international trade and to fund post-war reconstruction, the member states agreed to fix their exchange rates by tying their reserves to the US dollar. So right there, 1944, the US dollar wins. They're able to do whatever they want, essentially. It doesn't even matter because everyone's going to be buying up US dollars for the foreseeable future. And this gave them such a boost for obvious reasons. So that's all I'll say for this article here. I want to move on to what is now changing. The tightly controlled Chinese yuan will eventually supersede the dollar as the top international reserve currency, according to a new poll of institutional investors. This will be huge, but as I've said, it does not happen overnight. Imagine the Chinese yuan overtaking the US dollar. The US dollar has had this hegemony in place for so many decades, and it doesn't seem to be changing here with the increase in the US dollar's value in the recent past. But we need to look at the deeper fundamentals here. 53% of these investors think that the renminbi will surpass the US dollar as the world's major reserve currency. I also quoted in my book that over the next 25 years, which I'm sure that quote was probably about 5 years ago now, will be wiped out. The US dollar will be wiped out as the reserve currency, and it will instead become a basket of currencies. And this is very interesting. It also leads me to believe that they could go onto the IMF type currency like the SDR. That's something else I'd like to discuss as well, where the future holds for these. And this right here is out of Bloomberg. Look at this. As the U.S. Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew said, China needs to loosen its financial controls before the yuan can qualify to be included in the IMF's basket of reserve currencies. So obviously the US doesn't want to give up what it has, and it's going to use every ounce of power it has over a country like China, who is really surging to the forefront in many ways. Lew urged China to ease restrictions on the flow of capital and the setting of interest rates to ensure the yuan is increasingly used as an international currency. China must implement the, quote, necessary reforms before it will meet the IMF standards in the inclusion of the basket of currencies that determine the fund's special drawing rights. That's the SDR. So they should actually take their own advice here. But of course, that's the way this is. It's all rhetoric. It's all a bunch of lies anyway. So one last thing here that I want to get to is this. The currency swap agreements that have been going on now for years, making the yuan or the renminbi very, very attractive for the foreseeable future. Look at this. You have approximately 30 countries right here engaging in these currency swaps. And what does this mean? Is that they're not using the reserve currency, the US dollar, in order to do trade between each other. Yes, they are for certain instances, but these are the swap agreements that basically says, look, for this amount of money, we're not going to use the US dollar. We'll agree upon that. And then what happens later on? They re-sign the agreement. And every time they re-sign it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can see this especially with Russia, their partner in crime here, all doing what it takes essentially to build each other up and form their own alliances with other countries as well. And this is bringing the US dollar down. Yes, it's up currently, but it is not really looking good down the road. This is obviously something. There are short-term, there are mid-term, there are long-term things to look at, and we can obviously see that the long-term, let's say the longevity of the US dollar is going to be hurting. It is suffering. And this is a very clear indicator of that. So if you want to know the value of the yuan, if you want to know where it's headed, look at the currency swaps, keep your eye on them, because this is ultimately going to determine the next reserve currency and if China really deserves a place within this basket of currencies. And of course, it seems like it is going in that direction. Now, will the quote-unquote redback be itself the next reserve currency? I don't see it heading there, at least yet. They will probably have to go with a basket of currencies and use some sort of international, supranational organization like the IMF to make those judgment calls, because that allows an unelected set of technocrats, the technocratic elite, as I like to call them, to make the decisions. They will call the shots. And of course, just as always, the individual citizen will lose some of their liberty, some of their ability to make decisions with their money and everything that goes on within the governments over the financial decisions. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. This is all part of my e-course that I'm trying to educate the public. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, because this is the type of video a little bit lighter on the content and perhaps will allow people to start getting their feet wet in this type of information, and then they can move on to the deeper intel. So once again, share it with your friends and family, and if you're not already, you need to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. You just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.